Okay, well, the top story is a major move in the media business. Now, warning from the top: this is essentially a business story that's wrestling adjacent. So, the real home for a full and detailed discussion will likely be the next edition of Pollock and Thurston next week to get really into the nitty gritty. But it's certainly a big enough story that we should talk about it. It was on the evening news here. You know, this is two gigantic media companies potentially coming together. Netflix has agreed a deal to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery's studios and streaming business. I'll get into this in a transaction valued at around $72 billion in equity, or counted a different way, $82.7 billion in an enterprise value, which to my knowledge means factoring in some of the debt and other things like that. From a pro wrestling standpoint, I think at the outset, it's worth saying I've seen a lot of commentary online today from people who are getting miles ahead of their skis in terms of what this might mean, particularly for AEW. But there are potential future implications, even from the fact that we're going to have possibly a shrinking media landscape here with these two huge companies. So it's also worth noting that Warner Brothers Discovery already announced earlier this year, well before today's developments, back in June, I think it was, a plan to split itself into two separate publicly traded companies. One is this streaming and studios business that Netflix wants. And that's built around Warner Brothers TV and the Motion Picture Group, the WB logo that we're all so familiar with. DC Studios, HBO Max streaming.
The profitable good parts.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it's the film and TV IP like Harry Potter and, as we already mentioned, DC, their big libraries, all of that. That's what Netflix wants to buy. Now, insiders sometimes call the other half shitco because apparently a lot of the debt has been lumped in with it as well. Mm-hmm. And what it is going to be called Global Networks. This is not what Netflix wants. It's the linear TV side largely of what WBD currently has. So that's CNN, TNT, of course, TBS, the Discovery Channel, and one streaming element, I suppose, in Discovery Plus. So Netflix's proposed deal is to buy the streaming and studios company after the separation happens in roughly 12 to 18 months. I think it is worth putting a reality check in here at this point that there's already a lot of political opposition to this on both sides of the aisle. There are antitrust concerns. This might not come to pass, even in the White House. Not to get too much into the politics of it all, but it was well reported that the White House favoured a Paramount Skydance takeover of WBD, which would have included CNN, so that it became perhaps a little less liberal. I'm getting into the weeds a wee bit here, but I think it's all to say that this is not a done deal, and there's an awful long way to go. But if it does happen for wrestling fans, the key issue here will be, what does it mean for AEW? Because it's got a foot in both halves of the current company. Last year, AEW and Warner's agreed a new multi-year media rights extension. And under that deal, Dynamite remains on TBS, Collision remains on TNT, both of which sit on the global network side of this potential split. And at the same time, that agreement brought AEW's weekly shows and now the pay-per-views onto HBO Max streaming, which would be part of the split. Mm-hmm. The reporting is that renewal was a 3-year deal with an option for a 4th year, estimated at roughly $170 million a year when rights fees and other elements are included. Mm-hmm. So cut right to the chase, really, is like, what does this mean for AEW? And I think the reasonable answer at the minute is nothing changes immediately. The shows stay on TBS and TNT, simulcast on Max. There's a multi-year contract in place. The bigger questions are more in the medium term to long term. If it goes through, what does Netflix do? Does Netflix keep HBO Max as a separate concern? Does it just absorb it into Netflix proper? Do they try to restructure the streaming element of AEW's deal? And all of this, we simply don't know because it depends on contract language that isn't written or contract language we haven't seen that's current. How regulators handle all of this over the next year plus. So there's a long road to go. But I mean, in essence, we are looking at potentially a gigantic conglomeration here of two media giants.
Yeah. This is a massive story for everybody's sort of entertainment concerns, not just what we're talking about right now, but like the professional wrestling part of it, the AEW part of it is such a small, minuscule part. Yeah. But obviously, it's of interest for this particular podcast. And as you, I think, did a great job of Neil of recapping. We just don't really know. We can, of course, kind of play games and maybe speculate a little bit about like what could potentially happen. But I mean, this might not even go through for another year, maybe even longer, right? The number one thing right now is to figure out what's going to happen with this Discovery Global and basically the remnants of, this thing that Netflix is not acquiring, including TNT and TBS, who will take that up. Is the Paramount Skydance still interested in that? Where will that end up? So that I think is maybe of chief concern for AEW. Secondly, like what happens with HBO Max? If Netflix is going to keep HBO Max, possibly maybe including it as some sort of bundle service, but how attractive is AEW still to a streaming platform like HBO Max? You would think like decently, right? But of course, we have no idea what Netflix is going to do with it. Maybe they'll want all their sports on one particular streaming service and not the other, and therefore having both WWE and AEW might be a bit of a conflict. But without even knowing what the streaming numbers are for AEW on HBO Max, it's really tough to be able to say how valuable it is to them. Nonetheless, these are questions, and these are questions, of course, we'll maybe continue to find the answers to as time progresses. I
will say it's very interesting timing in that HBO Max doesn't exist at the moment in the UK. Sky Television over here has a deal for their best properties, House of the Dragon and all of that sort of Games of Thrones adjacent stuff. White Lotus, all of those HBO sort of premium shows. But it is launching in March, or it's due to, and it's due to launch in quite a few other European markets even sooner than that in January. And they do have great IP. They're already filming whatever you think of J.K. Rowling, this will be a big show. They're filming a remake of Harry Potter as a television show. So they've got a lot of intellectual property that's extremely valuable. So yeah, it's a guessing game totally. Will Netflix want to put that kind of stuff on Netflix? Or would it be, do they just keep HBO Max as a separate going concern that people have to subscribe to? Maybe that makes more financial sense. And these are all unknowns.
On the other hand, maybe AEW is incredibly valuable to HBO Max. Again, without knowing the numbers, we can't say exactly whether or not it is. And if that's the case, if they want to keep HBO Max as its own separate subscription so they can maybe maximize their user base and revenue, then I think this is actually a great thing, for AEW. Again, really, really hard to say at the moment. In either case, like AEW's deal goes until, let's say, about 2027, possibly 2028 with the option year. Their role kind of remains the same. Perform as great as possible so that you remain valuable to the marketplace, so that even if you don't have a home here, you might find a home somewhere else. Now those options are maybe continuing to dwindle with WWE being involved in so much, but there are still surely options out there for high performing properties, so I don't know if for AEW this changes all that much. And even if there are results, we probably won't feel them for quite some time.
Yeah, up to 3 years it could be. I think we'll probably, things might change before that. But you're right. I think in the immediate to medium term, AEW just needs to plug along. Cable is somewhat of a legacy thing at the moment, but it's still profitable. So if they can bring some eyes, and clearly last year it was thought worth this 170 million a year for them. So you know, watch this space, I guess.
Watch the space, and I'm sure all the other spaces that are covering this story, as it has wide-reaching effects, of course.
December on the Post Wrestling Cafe, we have 2 editions of Rewind Away set for you, including a patron's pick where you have voted for us to review the Survivor Series from 1991, Hulk Hogan's Gravest Challenge. Then it's over to 2002 and a review of the very first WWE draft involving Raw and SmackDown as they kick off the brand extension. David Bitzenspan is going to join me as we review Video Killed the Radio Star, a documentary on Bubba the Love Sponge, and the sex tape involving Hulk Hogan. Plus, we will have reviews of TNA Final Resolution, New Japan's World Tag League Final, Collision Course every single week, and XL editions of Rewind of Raw, Dynamite, and SmackDown. Sign up now at postwrestlingcafe.com.